The divorce papers hit the table with a sound like a gunshot. I watched my husband's face drain of color as he realized what I'd done. Not just filed, but attached every bank statement, every forged signature, every lie he'd told the mortgage company using my name. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The lawyer I'd hired sat beside me, stone-faced, while my daughter stood in the doorway, looking like she'd seen a ghost. Because she had. She was looking at the ghost of the woman they'd both thought they'd buried. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 3 months, to when I still believed love was supposed to hurt this much. My name doesn't matter much now, but the city does, Phoenix, Arizona, where the heat isn't just in the air, but in the way people burn you without ever raising their voice. I was 68 years old, living in a house that had my daughter's name on everything but my heartbeat in every wall. This was supposed to be our fresh start. The place where my sacrifice, selling my own home, the one I'd spent 40 years paying off, would finally mean something. I remember the day I signed those papers at the title company. The realtor kept asking if I was sure, and I kept saying yes because my daughter Sarah was right there, squeezing my hand, promising this was going to be perfect. We'd live together, she said. Multi-generational living, she called it. Like we were starting some beautiful tradition instead of what it really was, her using my equity to get a house she couldn't afford on her own. The realtor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes that had seen too many stories like mine, slid the paperwork across the table one more time. Mrs. Henderson, she'd said, using my late husband's name like a reminder of everything I was leaving behind. Once you sign this, the proceeds from your home sale will go directly into the down payment for your daughter's property. You won't have any claim to the new house. You understand that, right? I'd nodded, squeezed Sarah's hand tighter. My daughter had looked at me with those eyes, the same eyes I'd gazed into when she was born, when she'd graduated college, when she'd told me she was getting married. "Mom," she'd said softly, "this is going to be so perfect. We'll finally have time together. You won't have to worry about maintaining that big house all alone anymore." She'd made it sound like she was doing me a favor. And God help me, I believed her. The house was beautiful, I'll give her that. Spanish tile, a courtyard with a fountain that never worked quite right, rooms that echoed because we never had enough furniture to fill them. Sarah lived in the master suite with her husband Derek. I got the smallest bedroom, the one that faced the alley where the garbage trucks came at 5 in the morning. That first week, I tried to make it feel like home. I hung my favorite curtains, the ones with the little blue flowers that my late husband had picked out 20 years ago. They looked ridiculous in that room, too cheerful for the beige walls and the view of dumpsters. Sarah came in while I was adjusting them, took one look, and wrinkled her nose. "Those don't really match the aesthetic we're going for, Mom." "Oh," I said, my hands still on the fabric. "I thought, this is my room, so—" I know, but, like, people can see into this room from the street. It's kind of the first impression of the house, you know?" She smiled that smile, the one that was supposed to soften the blow. "Maybe we could get you something more neutral. I saw some really cute beige ones at Target." Beige. Everything in this house was beige. Beige walls, beige furniture, beige lives pretending to be fulfilling. I took down my curtains that afternoon, folded them carefully, and put them in a box in the closet. Told myself it didn't matter. They were just curtains. Such a small thing to compromise on. That's how it starts, you know, the small compromises that don't seem like much. A pair of curtains, the timing of your coffee, the volume of your television, each one reasonable on its own. But together, they build a cage so gradually you don't notice you're trapped until the door locks behind you. I should have known something was wrong when they started having family dinners without me. Not every time. That would have been too obvious. Just often enough that I'd walk into the kitchen and smell the remnants of a meal I wasn't invited to. Sarah would look embarrassed, mumble something about it being last minute, promise to include me next time. Next time never came. The first time it happened, I'd come home from the grocery store, buying food for all of us with my limited money, and found them at the dining table. Candles lit, wine glasses half empty, The good plates I'd given Sarah as a wedding gift spread with the remnants of what looked like chicken piccata. My favorite dish, the one I used to make for her when she was little. "Oh, Mom!" Sarah had jumped up, guilt flashing across her face before being replaced by that practiced smile. "We didn't know when you'd be back. Derek surprised me with date night." Date night. In the house I'd bought them, with food they'd prepared in the kitchen we all shared, at the table where I sat alone most nights while they ate in their bedroom. That's nice," I'd said, holding my grocery bags like shields. I'll put these away." Derek hadn't even looked up from his plate. I'd gone to my room that night and cried for the first time since moving in. Not big, dramatic sobs. Just quiet tears that slid down my face while I sat on the edge of my bed, the bed from my old house that looked too big in this small room, and wondered when I'd become so irrelevant to my own daughter. Derek barely looked at me. When he did, it was with this expression I couldn't quite read. Not hatred exactly, more like assessment. Like he was calculating something, and I was just a number that didn't quite add up the way he wanted. I'd catch him sometimes, watching me from across the room with those cold blue eyes. He'd be scrolling through his phone or reading something on his laptop, and I'd feel his gaze like a physical weight. When I'd look up, he'd glance away. But not before I saw it. That calculating look. Like a predator deciding if prey was worth the effort. He worked in finance, something with investments and portfolios that he'd explain in a tone that made me feel stupid for not understanding. Sarah would gaze at him adoringly while he talked about market trends and fiscal quarters, and I'd sit there wondering when my daughter had become someone who valued money over people. "You wouldn't understand, Barbara," he'd said once when I'd asked a question about his work. Not meanly. Worse than meanly. Dismissively. Like explaining would be a waste of his valuable time. "It's pretty complex stuff. Numbers aren't really your thing, are they?" Sarah had laughed. Actually laughed. Like it was charming that her husband had just insulted her mother's intelligence. I'd wanted to remind him that I'd balanced a household budget for 40 years. That I'd put 2 kids through college on a secretary's salary after my husband died. That I'd paid off a mortgage and saved enough to help with Sarah's wedding and still had money left over. That I understood numbers just fine. I just didn't use them to measure people's worth. But I didn't say any of that. Just smiled and changed the subject and added it to the growing list of small humiliations I was collecting like bruises. The first real crack came on Sarah's birthday. I'd bought her a necklace, nothing expensive, but something I knew she'd love because I was still her mother and I still knew her favorite color was emerald green. She opened it at the dining table, smiled that tight smile she'd perfected, and said thank you in a voice that sounded like she was reading from a script. Then Derek asked where I'd gotten the money for it. Just like that. "Where did you get the money for this, Barbara?" I felt my face get hot. "My Social Security check," I told him. Same as I always told him when he asked these questions, which was becoming more frequent. He nodded slowly, like he was doing me a favor by accepting this answer, and the conversation moved on. But Sarah didn't put the necklace on. She set it aside, and I never saw it again. 2 weeks later, I saw that same necklace still in its box. Price tag removed, but the impression of it still visible on the cardboard, in the donation bag Sarah was preparing for Goodwill. My gift. The one I'd spent 2 weeks searching for, visiting 3 different stores to find the perfect shade of emerald. The one I'd spent nearly $100 on, money I couldn't really afford to spend. Being donated like trash. I stood in the hallway, staring at that box, and something twisted in my chest. Not quite breaking, not yet, but bending, warping, weakening. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? That my feelings were hurt? That I felt rejected? These were the kinds of emotions Derek had trained me to see as inconvenient, as needy, as proof that I was, as he'd once muttered under his breath when he thought I couldn't hear, too sensitive for her own good. You know what the worst part was? I made excuses for them. "Oh, they're just stressed," I'd tell myself while lying in that small bedroom, listening to them laugh in another part of the house. "Sarah's busy with her new job. Derek's trying to make partner at his firm. They don't mean to exclude me, they're just busy. Busy. That word became my security blanket. The lie I wrapped around myself to keep from freezing in the truth. I'd wake up at dawn, old habits die hard, and make coffee in a kitchen that never felt like mine. The coffee maker was Derek's, a fancy thing with buttons I didn't understand. I'd pour my cup and retreat to my room before they woke up, because Derek had mentioned once that the smell bothered him. Mentioned it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. And I, like an idiot, had adjusted my entire morning routine to accommodate him. But even that wasn't enough. One morning, about 2 months in, Derek appeared in the kitchen while I was making coffee. It was barely 6 a.m. He stood in the doorway in his expensive pajamas. Silk, probably. Because Derek didn't do anything that wasn't expensive, and watched me fumble with his complicated machine. "You're using too much water," he said. I jumped, nearly dropping the carafe. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were awake. I was trying to be quiet. The machine has measurements. You're supposed to fill it to the line." He crossed the kitchen and took the carafe from my hands. Like this. "See? It's not that complicated." His tone, God, his tone, like he was explaining something to a child, a not very bright child. "I'm sorry," I said again, because I was always apologizing in that house. "I'll get it right next time. Maybe you should just wait until I make coffee in the morning. I can make enough for both of us." He poured the water out, measured it precisely, poured it in again. "That way, you don't have to worry about it." Translation: that way, you don't mess up my expensive machine. I stopped making morning coffee after that, started buying instant coffee, the cheap kind, and making it with hot water from the tap in my bedroom. It tasted terrible, but it was mine. The one thing in that house that was entirely, completely mine. This is what emotional exclusion looks like, by the way. For those of you out there thinking your family situation is just a phase, just a rough patch, look closer. Does your presence feel like an imposition in your own home? Do conversations stop when you enter a room? Has your opinion become optional, then irrelevant, then never requested at all? I was becoming a ghost, and I was helping them erase me. The thing about being excluded is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's gradual, like water wearing down stone. One day, you're part of the family. The next, you're peripheral. And then one morning, you realize you're furniture. Less than furniture, actually, because at least furniture gets acknowledged when it's in the way. Sarah had her friends over one afternoon. I heard them in the living room, laughing about something, and I thought maybe I'd join them. Bring out some cookies I'd baked that morning. Be the kind of grandmother, well, potential grandmother, she wasn't married long enough yet. That brings warmth to gatherings. I walked in with the plate, smiling, and the conversation just stopped. All of them turned to look at me, and in Sarah's eyes I saw something that made my hands shake. Annoyance, like I'd interrupted something important, something I had no right to be part of. "Oh," one of her friends said, a blonde woman I'd never met, dressed in yoga pants that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Is this your—" "My mom," Sarah said quickly, too quickly. "Mom, these are my friends from the gym. We're just having a quick chat before our class." The blonde woman's expression shifted into something that might have been pity. "It's nice that you have family close by." The way she said it, like having your mother living with you was some kind of burden to be endured, some obligation Sarah was nobly fulfilling. She took the cookies, thanked me in that voice again, and I understood I was being dismissed. So I left, went back to my room, listened to them resume their conversation once I was gone, the sound of their laughter like glass breaking in my chest. I heard fragments of their conversation through my closed door. The walls, for all their beige, expensive paint, were thin. "How long is she staying?" someone asked. A pause. Then Sarah's voice, lower than before but still audible. "It's complicated. She sold her house to help us with the down payment." Oh, a loaded syllable. So it's like, permanent? Another pause. Longer this time. We're figuring it out. We're figuring it out. Like I was a problem to be solved. An equation that didn't balance. A mistake they were still deciding how to fix. That night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked. When had I gotten so small? Not physically, though. I'd lost weight I couldn't afford to lose. But small in that other way? That way where you take up less and less space in the world until you're not sure you exist at all. I touched my face, the skin papery under my fingers, and wondered when I'd stopped being Sarah's mother and become her burden. The fluorescent light in that bathroom was harsh, unforgiving. It showed every line, every spot, every year of my 68 years on Earth. But it was my eyes that shocked me most. They looked empty, like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything that made me myself, leaving just a shell going through the motions. My mother had looked like this once, near the end. After my father died and she'd moved in with my brother. I'd visited her there and seen that same empty expression, and I'd promised myself I'd never let that happen to me. I'd promised I'd maintain my independence, my dignity, my sense of self. And here I was, breaking that promise, becoming the very thing I'd sworn I'd never be. I need you to understand something. I wasn't always this person. There was a time when I stood up for myself, when my voice mattered. But that was before I convinced myself that family trumps everything, that blood is thicker than dignity, that a mother's love means accepting whatever crumbs her children offer. You ever read those articles about women who stay in bad situations? They always make it sound so simple. Why doesn't she just leave? Like leaving is a switch you flip instead of a mountain you have to climb with broken legs. I read once that women who leave abusive situations have a 75% higher chance of being killed than those who stay. That statistic wasn't about physical danger in my case, but the principle held. Leaving meant admitting I'd been wrong. Leaving meant facing a world where I'd given up my home, my security, my future, for nothing. So I stayed. And I justified it. Sarah is just stressed about her marriage, I'd tell myself. I'd overhear them fighting sometimes, her and Derek. The walls in that house were thinner than they looked. They'd argue about money, mostly. About his spending, her salary, the mortgage payment that always seemed to surprise them, even though it was the same amount every month. Once I heard him say something that made my blood run cold. He said, "We wouldn't even have this house if it wasn't for your mother's stupidity." Stupidity. That's what my sacrifice was to him. Stupidity. I waited for Sarah to defend me, held my breath in my small bedroom, listening for her voice to rise in my defense. But she said nothing. Absolutely nothing. And somehow that silence hurt more than his words. Actually, that's not quite true. She did say something. After a long, terrible pause where I sat frozen on my bed, hardly breathing, she said, "Keep your voice down. She might hear you." Not, "Don't call my mother stupid." Not, "That's unfair. She was trying to help us." Just a warning to be quieter while insulting me. Like the problem wasn't the insult itself, but the possibility that I might know about it. I pulled my pillow over my head that night and sobbed into it. Tried to muffle the sound because even my grief felt like an imposition. Even my pain was something I had to hide, minimize, apologize for. The next morning, I did something I'm not proud of. I offered to help with the mortgage. I had some savings, not much, but enough to matter. Money I'd been setting aside for emergencies, for the medical expenses I knew were coming as I got older, for maybe a small trip I'd always wanted to take. I offered it to them like it was nothing, like I was just helping out, family helping family. Derek's face lit up in a way it never had when he looked at me before. Suddenly, I existed. Suddenly, I was useful. "Are you sure, Barbara?" he'd asked, but his eyes were already calculating, already spending money I hadn't even handed over yet. "That's very generous of you." Generous. like I was some benevolent stranger bestowing a gift, not a desperate woman buying back scraps of affection from her own daughter. Sarah had hugged me, actually wrapped her arms around me for the first time in weeks. "Thank you, Mom. This really helps. You have no idea how much pressure we've been under." I had closed my eyes and breathed in her familiar scent, the same shampoo she'd used since high school, and told myself this was worth it. This moment. This brief return to feeling like her mother instead of her burden. This was worth the $5,000 I was about to transfer to their account. It wasn't. But I didn't know that yet. They took the money. Of course they took it. And for a few weeks, things were better. Sarah smiled at me more. Derek actually asked how my day was. I felt like I'd bought my way back into my own family, and I was pathetic enough to be grateful for it. But money runs out, and gratitude runs out faster. I watched it happen in real time. The first week after I gave them the money, Sarah invited me to dinner every night. They made conversation, asked about my day, included me in their plans for the weekend. Derek even thanked me again, told me how much it meant to them. The second week, I was invited to dinner most nights, but not all. The conversation was a bit more perfunctory, the gratitude less effusive. By the third week, we were back to where we'd started. Separate meals, closed doors, that calculating look in Derek's eyes. By the fourth week, they were asking for more. Not directly. Never directly. That would have been too honest. Instead, Sarah would mention casually how expensive the property taxes were, how the water heater needed replacing, how Derek's car was making a strange noise and the repair shop quoted them $1,500. Each statement followed by a sigh, a worried look, a pregnant pause where I was clearly supposed to offer help. And God help me, sometimes I did, because the alternative was watching my daughter stress, and 30 years of motherhood had programmed me to fix her problems. Even when her problems were manufactured. Even when the help I was offering was bleeding me dry. By the time I realized I'd sold my home for a spot in their house that was never really mine, I'd already sacrificed too much to back out. I'd given up my independence, my security, my peace of mind. I'd packed up 40 years of memories, my late husband's collection of vinyl records, the kids' artwork from elementary school, the china cabinet my mother had given me, and put it all in a storage unit across town because there was no room for it in the new house. No room. They had a 3-car garage half empty, but no room for my mother's china cabinet. I'd driven by the storage unit one day, about 3 months in, pulled into the parking lot and just sat there, staring at the orange door of Unit 237. Behind that door was my entire life, my history, every physical reminder that I'd once been a person with a home and a family and a place in the world. I'd gotten out of the car, unlocked the unit, and stood in the doorway looking at the boxes stacked to the ceiling, everything labeled in my own handwriting. Kitchen, fine china. Living room, photos. James's study, books. My late husband's name on a box, like he was still here, like his things were just waiting for him to come home. I'd pulled out a box at random. Inside was our wedding album. I sat on the concrete floor of that storage unit and flipped through pictures of a woman I barely recognized. She was young, 23, and smiling like she knew exactly who she was and where she belonged. Her husband had his arm around her, and he was looking at her like she was the only person in the world. I wondered what that young woman would think if she could see me now, if she'd recognize this hollow-eyed, gray-haired stranger who'd given away everything she'd built, who'd let herself become invisible in her own life. I'd put the album back, locked the unit, and driven away. Haven't been back since. Can't afford to, emotionally or financially. The storage unit costs $85 a month. Money I don't really have, but can't bring myself to give up because it's the last physical evidence that I existed before this. I'd drive by my old house sometimes. The new owners had painted it a different color, put up different curtains. It looked happy. It looked like a home. And I'd think about how I used to sit on that porch every evening, watching the neighbors walk their dogs, feeling like I belonged somewhere. Now I belonged nowhere. I was a tenant in my daughter's house, except tenants have rights, and I had none. The isolation was the worst part. Derek had this way of making me feel like I was imposing whenever I tried to join them. Little comments, subtle redirects. "Oh, we're having a quiet night tonight, just the two of us. We're watching something you wouldn't like. We're talking about work stuff, pretty boring." Each excuse reasonable on its own, but together they built a wall I couldn't climb. My friends from church started asking why they never saw me anymore. I made excuses, busy helping Sarah settle in. Getting used to the new neighborhood, just taking it easy these days. But the truth was, I'd become afraid to leave the house for too long. Afraid that if I wasn't there, they'd realize how much easier life was without me. Afraid they'd change the locks, and I'd come home to find my belongings in trash bags on the curb. That fear wasn't irrational. I know how that sounds. But you have to understand, emotional abuse makes you paranoid because sometimes paranoia is just pattern recognition. I started keeping my important documents in my room. Birth certificate, social security card, the deed to my old house that I'd signed over. I'd take them out sometimes, late at night, and look at my signature on that deed. How confident it looked. How sure. How stupid. 3 months before everything exploded, I stopped doing my morning ritual. For years, decades even, I'd wake up early, make my coffee, and sit by the window watching the sunrise. It was my meditation, my moment of peace before the day began. But that small bedroom faced the alley, not the sunrise. And Derek had mentioned the coffee smell, and Sarah had asked if I could maybe be quieter in the mornings because the walls were thin. So I stopped. Just like that. Gave up the one thing that was entirely mine because it inconvenienced them. The morning I quit that ritual, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. My hair had gone completely gray. When had that happened? The woman looking back at me had hollow cheeks and eyes that had forgotten how to hope. She looked beaten. She looked like she'd given up. And she had. That was my collapse symbol, that moment. Not a dramatic breakdown, not a screaming match or thrown dishes. Just a quiet surrender to the idea that this was all I deserved. This half-life in someone else's house, this slow erasure, this becoming less and less until I disappeared entirely. I think about that woman now, and I want to shake her, want to scream at her to wake up, to see what was happening, to save herself. But she couldn't hear me yet. She was too busy trying to be small enough to be loved. Do you know what it's like to police your own existence? To calculate how much space you're allowed to take up, how loud you're allowed to be, how much of yourself you're permitted to express. It's exhausting. It's soul-crushing. And it's exactly what they wanted, because a woman who's busy making herself invisible doesn't notice when you're stealing from her. I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there, bright as road flares. But I was so focused on being grateful for the scraps of attention they threw me that I missed the bigger picture. Derek had started asking questions about my finances. Casual questions at first. How much was my social security check? Did I have any other income? What happened to my savings from the house sale? I answered because I thought he was trying to help, trying to make sure I was secure. God, I was naive. He'd bring up financial planning, estate planning, making sure everything was organized for my future. Said he knew a guy, a financial advisor, who could help me set things up properly. I should have asked why he cared. Should have wondered why a man who could barely look at me suddenly wanted to organize my finances. But I was so starved for attention, for any sign that I mattered to them, that I read care into what was actually calculation. One evening, Derek cornered me in the kitchen. Sarah was working late, or so she said, though I was beginning to suspect she was just avoiding coming home, and it was just the two of us. He'd made himself a drink, something amber in a crystal glass that probably cost more than my monthly social security check. "Barbara, we need to talk about your future," he'd said, leaning against the counter with that posture of his, the one that was meant to look casual but felt predatory. "My future? Your financial future, your estate. What happens to your assets when you know." He'd waved his hand vaguely, like death was an inconvenient detail he didn't want to articulate. "I don't have much in the way of assets," I'd said, feeling my cheeks burn. "Just my social security and some savings." "How much savings?" The question was so direct, so intrusive that I'd actually taken a step back. That's private. Private? Barbara, we're family. There's no privacy in family. Besides, I'm trying to help you. You need to make sure everything's in order. Set up beneficiaries, maybe a trust. My guy can help with all of that. His guy. Everything was always his guy. His financial advisor, his lawyer, his accountant. Never anyone I chose. Never anyone who might actually protect my interests instead of his. I appreciate the concern, I'd said carefully, but I'm not sure I need that level of complexity. His face had hardened. Just a fraction, just for a moment, but I saw it. The mask slipping, the calculation showing through. Suit yourself. But when something happens and your affairs are a mess, don't expect us to clean it up. He'd left the kitchen then, taking his expensive drink and his veiled threats with him. And I'd stood there, hands shaking, finally starting to understand that this wasn't concern. It was reconnaissance. Sarah started talking about how expensive everything was. The mortgage, the utilities, the property taxes. She'd sigh over the bills like they were a surprise, like she hadn't known what she was signing up for when she bought a house she couldn't afford. And I'd feel guilty. Guilty for living there. Guilty for existing. Guilty for not contributing more. So I contributed more, bought groceries I barely ate, paid for repairs on appliances I rarely used, slipped Sarah money for emergencies that were never quite explained. Each time, I'd see that flicker of satisfaction in Derek's eyes, and I'd tell myself it was gratitude. I was funding my own erasure and calling it love. The thing about emotional exclusion is that it makes you doubt your own reality. You start questioning whether you're being too sensitive, too needy, too demanding. Maybe they're right to treat you this way. Maybe you are the problem. Maybe if you could just be better, smaller, more grateful, they'd let you back in. That's the trap. That's what keeps you frozen when every instinct is screaming at you to run. I'd pray about it sometimes. Late at night, in that small bedroom that smelled like someone else's house, I'd pray for guidance, for clarity, for the strength to accept what I couldn't change, and the wisdom to know what I could. The answers never came in the way I expected. They came in small moments of lucidity, brief windows where I'd see the situation clearly before the fog of denial rolled back in. But I wasn't ready to see it yet. Wasn't ready to admit that I'd sacrificed everything for people who saw me as an ATM with a heartbeat. Not yet, but soon. The letter came on a Tuesday. I remember that detail because Tuesdays were grocery days, and I'd just gotten back from the store. Had spent $90 on food they'd requested. Derek wanted this specific brand of coffee. Sarah needed ingredients for some recipe she saw online. And I was putting it away when I saw the envelope on the counter. It was addressed to me, but it had already been opened. Derek was sitting at the dining table, and he had this look on his face. Not guilty, curious, like he was waiting to see how I'd react. I picked up the letter with shaking hands. It was from a mortgage company. Not our mortgage company, a different one. And it was thanking me for my recent application, informing me that my loan had been approved, congratulating me on my new financial commitment. The blood drained from my face so fast I thought I might faint. What loan? What application? I hadn't applied for any loan. Hadn't even thought about applying for a loan. I had no need for a loan. I had no credit, barely any income, nothing that would make me a viable candidate for borrowing money. Derek? My voice came out strangled. What is this? He stood up slowly, and there was something in his posture that made me take a step back. Something predatory. It's nothing to worry about, he said. Just some paperwork we had to file. For the house. What do you mean for the house? This says I applied for a mortgage. Well, technically, yes. We needed your signature for some refinancing. Sarah must have forgotten to mention it to you. But Sarah wasn't home. Sarah was never home anymore, always at work or out with friends or anywhere but here. And I was alone with Derek, who was looking at me like I was a problem he needed to solve. I didn't sign anything, I said, and even as the words left my mouth, I knew how pointless they were. Sure you did. Remember last month when I asked you to sign some papers? For your own protection, I said. Estate planning stuff. I did remember. He'd put a stack of papers in front of me, pointed to the signature lines, and I'd signed them without reading, because he said it was just formalities. Just making sure I was taken care of. The scene played back in my memory with horrible clarity now. It had been a Sunday afternoon. Sarah had been there too, hovering in the background, but letting Derek do all the talking. He'd spread the papers on the dining table, this same dining table, and handed me a pen. It's just standard stuff, he'd said. Power of attorney, healthcare directives, beneficiary forms. We want to make sure you're protected if anything happens. I'd been touched. Genuinely touched that they were thinking about my welfare, that they cared enough to help me organize these things. I'd signed every page he indicated, didn't read them. Why would I? He was my son-in-law. Sarah was watching. Family doesn't hurt family, except when they do. Those were loan documents? My voice was barely a whisper. Among other things. He shrugged, like it didn't matter. Like he hadn't just committed fraud using my name. Look, Barbara, you benefit from this too. The house is in your name as well as Sarah's now. You should be thanking me. The house is in my name? The mortgage is in your name. There's a difference. He smiled, and it was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. But don't worry, we'll make the payments. Probably, as long as we can afford it. Probably. The word echoed in my head like a death knell. What happens if you can't make the payments? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Then I guess your credit gets dinged. But that's not going to happen, Barbara. You worry too much. He stepped closer, and I could smell his cologne. Expensive, cloying, nauseating. We're family. Family takes care of each other. You've taken care of us, and we'll take care of you. That's how this works. But it wasn't how it worked. It was never how it worked. I was taking care of them, and they were taking from me. Two very different things. I stood there holding that letter, and I felt something crack inside me. Not break, not yet, but crack. A hairline fracture in the foundation of my denial. They had used me, used my name, my credit, my signature. Had treated me like a tool, a means to an end, something to be exploited and discarded. And I had let them. Had signed those papers without reading them because I trusted my family. Because I believed family wouldn't hurt me. I was wrong. Derek was watching me with this expression that made my skin crawl, waiting to see if I'd fight or fold, calculating whether I was still useful or if I'd become a liability. I folded. God help me. I folded. Okay, I said softly. Okay. His smile widened. Good, I knew you'd understand. Family has to stick together, right? Family. The word tasted like ashes in my mouth. I went to my room and closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed with that letter in my hands, and felt the full weight of what I'd lost. Not just my home, not just my savings, but my sense of self, my ability to trust my own judgment, my faith that the people who were supposed to love me actually did. The numbers on the letter swam in front of my eyes. $200,000. They'd taken out a $200,000 mortgage in my name. Me, a 68-year-old woman on Social Security with no job and no assets. How had they even qualified me for this? The answer, of course, was that they'd lied. About my income, about my assets, about everything. And if the loan went bad, if they couldn't make the payments, it would be my credit destroyed. My Social Security garnished. My life ruined. They had set me up to take the fall for their greed. I should have called the police right then. Should have gone to a lawyer, reported the fraud, protected myself. But I didn't. You know why? Because even then, even knowing what they'd done, part of me still wanted to believe this was a misunderstanding, that Sarah didn't know what Derek had done, that my daughter wouldn't do this to me. The capacity for self-deception in the human heart is infinite. I found a statistic later when I was researching what to do. About half of all people with dementia experience some form of abuse, 50%. And while I didn't have dementia, I understood the vulnerability. The way trust becomes a weapon in the hands of people who should protect you. The way family can destroy you more thoroughly than any stranger ever could. I didn't sleep that night. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Sarah come home late, listening to her and Derek talk in low voices in their bedroom. Couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I knew they were talking about me, about how to handle me, about whether I'd figured it out or if I was still blind enough to be useful. Around 2 a.m., I got up and did something I'd never done before. I pressed my ear against the wall between my room and theirs. Their voices came through muffled but audible. Derek's voice, sharp with irritation. Told you she'd freak out when she saw the letter. Sarah's voice, defensive. You said you'd intercept the mail. How was I supposed to know you'd just leave it lying around? Maybe because you're supposed to be checking the mail too. This is a team effort, Sarah. A pause, then Sarah again, quieter. Do you think she'll report it? No, she's too weak, too desperate to keep you happy. She'll swallow it like she swallows everything else we feed her. Laughter. They were laughing. At me, at my weakness, at how easy I'd been to manipulate. I pulled back from the wall, feeling sick, physically sick. Went to the bathroom and dry-heaved over the toilet while the reality of my situation crystallized with horrible clarity. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't Derek acting alone. Sarah knew. Sarah had always known. My daughter had actively participated in defrauding me, and she didn't feel bad about it. She was just annoyed that I might cause problems. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. That same harsh fluorescent light showing every year, every wrinkle, every evidence of a life lived. But something was different now. Something in my eyes. The emptiness was still there, but underneath it, something else was forming. Anger. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I left the house early and drove to my old church. I hadn't been in weeks. Told myself I was too tired, too busy helping Sarah settle in. But the truth was, I'd been ashamed. Ashamed to face the people who'd known me as a vibrant, independent woman and see what I'd become. Pastor Linda was in her office. She looked up when I knocked, and her face broke into a smile that faltered when she saw my expression. Barbara? Come in, come in. I've been worried about you. I sat in the chair across from her desk, and for a moment I couldn't speak. Couldn't figure out how to explain what had happened, how to put into words the way I'd been hollowed out from the inside. I need help, I finally said. I need spiritual guidance. I need to know if I'm going crazy. She leaned forward, concern etched in every line of her face. Tell me everything. So I did, everything. The exclusion, the manipulation, the forged signatures, the mortgage. The way I'd sacrificed my home and gotten nothing in return except a small bedroom and the privilege of being ignored. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she sat back in her chair with an expression I couldn't quite read. Barbara, she said gently, you're not going crazy. You're being abused. The word hit me like a slap. No, it's not that bad. They're not hitting me or... Abuse doesn't have to be physical. What you're describing is emotional and financial abuse. And it's serious. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. But they're my family. Sarah is my daughter. How can it be abuse if it's family? Abuse doesn't care about blood relations. If anything, it's worse when it comes from people we love because we want so desperately to believe they're acting out of love too. We sat in silence for a moment. She passed me tissues, let me cry without rushing me. What do? I asked when I could speak again. You protect yourself. You document everything. You talk to a lawyer. You get out of that house. I can't leave. I have nowhere to go. You have this church. You have me. You have a whole community of people who care about you. You're not alone, Barbara. You've never been alone. You just let them convince you that you were. Something shifted in me then. Not a dramatic revelation, but a small, quiet knowing. I didn't have to accept this. Didn't have to be small and grateful and invisible. I could fight back. I just didn't know how yet. Pastor Linda gave me the number of a lawyer who did pro bono work for seniors, told me to call him, explain the situation, see what my options were. She also gave me a key to the church's community room. "You can stay here if you need to," she said. "It's not much, but it's safe. And it's yours for as long as you need it." I held that key in my hand like it was a lifeline. Maybe it was. Over the next few weeks, I met with the lawyer. Older guy, kind eyes, patient voice. He listened to my story, looked over the documents I'd managed to copy when Sarah and Derek weren't home, and sighed heavily. His name was Robert Morrison, and he'd been doing elder law for 30 years. He'd seen cases like mine before. Too many of them, he said. The reading glasses perched on his nose made him look grandfatherly, safe. His office smelled like old books and coffee. "This is fraud," he said bluntly, clear as day. "They forged your signature on loan documents. That's a crime." "Can I prove it?" "Maybe, if you're willing to fight, if you're willing to take this to court, to testify against your own daughter." There it was, the impossible choice, justice or family, my rights or my relationship with Sarah, the law or love. He must have seen something in my face because he softened his tone. "I know this is hard. Most of my clients struggle with this decision. They want to believe their family will do the right thing, that if they just give them one more chance." "And do they? Do the families do the right thing?" He looked at me over his glasses. "In 30 years, Mrs. Henderson, I've seen it happen exactly twice. Twice out of hundreds of cases. Most of the time, the abuse escalates, because abusers don't stop when they realize they can get away with it. They escalate." The words settled over me like a weighted blanket, heavy but somehow clarifying. "I need time to think," I said. "Don't take too long. The longer this goes on, the harder it'll be to untangle." But thinking required clarity, and I was drowning in confusion. How had it come to this? How had the little girl I raised, the one I'd sacrificed everything for, become someone who could do this to me? I tried to talk to Sarah about it. Caught her alone one afternoon, asked her directly if she knew what Derek had done with the mortgage. She looked at me with those eyes I'd once known so well, now cold and distant. "Mom, you signed those papers. You agreed to help us." I signed papers I thought were for estate planning. I didn't know they were loan documents. "Well, you should have read them more carefully." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Just blame. I should have read them. I should have been smarter. I should have protected myself from my own daughter. "Sarah, this could destroy my credit. If you can't make the payments—" "We'll make the payments, Mom. God, you're so dramatic. We're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to build a life here. On my name, with my signature. Without my consent." She rolled her eyes, actually rolled her eyes. "You're being paranoid. Derek is handling everything. You just need to trust us." Trust. That word again. The weapon they kept using against me. I walked away from that conversation knowing I couldn't reach her. She was too far gone, too invested in this life they'd built on my back, too married to a man who saw me as a resource to be drained. I was alone, truly, completely alone. That night, I took everything I valued, my important documents, my mother's jewelry, the few photos I had of my late husband, and moved them to a safety deposit box at the bank. Did it quietly while they were out. Felt like a thief in a house that was supposed to be partly mine. But I was learning. Slowly, painfully learning that trust is earned, not given. That family isn't defined by blood, but by behavior. That sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones you die to protect. And I was done protecting them. The change didn't happen overnight. I didn't wake up one morning transformed into some avenging warrior. But I did wake up angry. Really, deeply. Bone-tired of being nice, angry. It started small. I stopped buying groceries for them. If Sarah asked why the fridge was empty, I'd say I only bought what I needed now. If Derek made a comment about wanting his special coffee, I'd shrug and suggest he buy it himself. The looks they gave me, like I was being unreasonable, like I was violating some unspoken contract by not funding their lifestyle anymore. Good. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them realize I wasn't just a wallet with a heartbeat. I changed my banking information so they couldn't see my account anymore. Derek had somehow gotten access, probably during one of those estate planning sessions, and I'd noticed money disappearing. Small amounts at first, $20 here, $50 there. Amounts small enough that I doubted myself, thought maybe I'd forgotten a purchase. But I hadn't forgotten. They'd been stealing. The lawyer helped me with that, helped me secure my accounts, change my passwords, lock down everything they might try to access. It felt good, taking back control, taking back power. But the best part? The sweetest revenge. I stopped being quiet. When they had their friends over and didn't invite me, I'd walk through the living room anyway, make myself seen, remind them I existed. If they wanted me invisible, they'd have to work for it. When Derek made one of his snide comments about how much the utilities cost, I'd mention loudly how strange it was that the mortgage payment kept going up. Watched his face darken, watched Sarah's eyes dart away. I was becoming a problem, a squeaky wheel, and I loved it. One evening they had a dinner party. 8 people, all dressed in expensive casual wear, drinking wine that probably cost more per bottle than my weekly grocery budget. They'd told me about it the day before, not an invitation, just information. We're having people over tomorrow night. You might want to stay in your room. I'd nodded, smiled, said, of course. Then, at 8 p.m., right when their party was in full swing, I'd walked into the living room in my bathrobe and slippers. "Oh, excuse me," I'd said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I just needed to get some water from the kitchen. Don't mind me." The room had gone silent. All those fashionable people staring at the old woman in the bathrobe. Sarah's face had turned bright red. "Mom, we're kind of in the middle of something." "I know, honey. I'll just be a minute. This is such a lovely party. You all having a nice time?" I'd smiled at their guests. "I'm Barbara, by the way, Sarah's mother. I live here too." The emphasis on that last word had been deliberate. A reminder that this was my house too, whether they acknowledged it or not. Derek had started to stand, but one of their guests, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, had smiled back at me. "It's nice to meet you, Barbara. I didn't know Sarah's mother lived here." "Oh, yes," I'd said, getting my water with deliberate slowness. "I sold my house to help them with the down payment, so we're all one big happy family now." The awkwardness in that room had been delicious. The lawyer had explained my options. I could report the fraud, press charges, try to get my name off the mortgage. But it would be messy, expensive, and there was no guarantee I'd win. Or I could cut my losses, protect what I had left, and walk away. Neither option felt like justice. But then, justice rarely does when you're the victim. I started looking for apartments. Nothing fancy, just a small one-bedroom somewhere I could afford on my Social Security. It was humbling, starting over at 68, downsizing from a home I'd owned to a rental I'd barely afford. But it was mine. It would be mine. The first few apartments I looked at were depressing. Dingy carpets stained with God knows what. Windows that didn't quite close all the way. Neighbors whose arguments you could hear through walls thin as paper. I'd sit in these viewing appointments and think, is this really what my life has come to? From a home I owned outright to? This? But then Pastor Linda took me to see a place on the east side of town. It was small, maybe 600 square feet, but it was clean, recently painted. The landlord was a widow herself, Mrs. Chen, who understood what it meant to start over. She didn't run my credit, didn't ask invasive questions about why a woman my age was looking for her own place. "You have kind eyes," she'd said in her accented English. "That's all I need to know." I cried in the car afterward. Pastor Linda had just held my hand and let me sob. These great heaving sobs of relief and grief mixed together. Relief that I'd found a place. Grief that I needed one. Pastor Linda helped me look. Spent afternoons driving me around to different complexes, asking questions I wouldn't have known to ask, making sure I didn't sign anything predatory. She was the ally I needed, the support system that kept me from drowning. "You're doing the right thing," she'd say, "getting out, protecting yourself." But it didn't feel right. It felt like failure, like admitting that my family didn't love me, that my daughter had chosen a man over her mother, that everything I'd sacrificed had been for nothing. Some days I wanted to give up, to go back to that small bedroom and accept this half-life because at least it was familiar. At least I knew what to expect. There were moments when I'd catch myself reaching for the phone to call Sarah, to apologize even though I'd done nothing wrong, to offer more money, more help, more of myself. The programming ran deep. 30 years of putting her needs before mine didn't just disappear because I'd finally seen the truth. I'd have to physically put the phone down and sit on my hands. Remind myself that going back wasn't an option. That the woman I'd been in that house, small, apologetic, disappearing, she couldn't survive there anymore. And I wanted to survive. More than that, I wanted to live. Pastor Linda caught me on one of those days, standing in the church parking lot with my phone in my hand, tears streaming down my face. "Calling her won't fix this," she'd said gently. "I know, what if I'm making a mistake? What if I'm giving up too easily?" "Barbara, look at me." She'd taken both my hands in hers. "This isn't giving up. This is survival. This is you choosing life over slow death. Don't confuse leaving with quitting. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away." Those words became my mantra. I'd repeat them on the hard days, the days when loneliness felt like it might swallow me whole. This is survival. This is choosing life. But then I'd remember that morning when I stopped watching the sunrise. That moment when I looked in the mirror and saw a ghost. And I'd know I couldn't go back to that. Couldn't let them erase me completely. So I kept planning, kept documenting, kept preparing for the moment when I'd finally cut the cord. That moment came faster than I expected. The confrontation wasn't planned. None of the best moments in life are. I was packing, quietly, methodically, while they were at work. Had found a small apartment across town, signed the lease, arranged for utilities. I was leaving in 3 days, and I hadn't told them yet. Figured I'd just go, leave a note, avoid the drama. But Sarah came home early. I heard her car in the driveway, and my heart started racing. I was in my bedroom with boxes everywhere, my belongings half packed. There was no hiding what I was doing. She appeared in the doorway, and the look on her face was priceless. Shock, anger, something that might have been fear. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving." "Leaving? You can't leave? Where are you going to go?" "I found an apartment. I'm moving in this weekend." She stepped into the room, and I saw her calculating. Saw the exact moment she realized what my leaving meant. The mortgage payments would fall on her and Derek. They'd lose their safety net, their backup plan. "Mom, you can't do this. We need you." And there it was. Not, "We love you," or "We want you to stay." Just, "We need you." "No," I said, and my voice was steady. "You need my money. You need my signature. You need someone to blame when this all falls apart. But you don't need me." "That's not true. You're being dramatic." "Stop." I held up my hand. "Just stop. I know about the mortgage. I know about the forged signatures. I know you've been stealing from my bank account. I know everything, Sarah." Her face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. And so does Derek. And so does the lawyer I've been talking to." That got her attention. "Lawyer?" I could press charges. I could report the fraud. I could make this very, very difficult for both of you. I paused, let that sink in. But I'm not going to. Relief flooded her face, and I felt disgust rise in my throat. She wasn't relieved because she realized she'd hurt me. She was relieved because she wasn't going to face consequences. I'm not pressing charges because I want to be done with this, with you, with all of it. I'm taking my name off everything I can, protecting what's left of my finances, and walking away. You'll never hear from me again. Mom, don't call me that. You lost the right to call me that when you decided I was worth more to you on paper than in person. I turned back to my packing. She stood there for a moment, and I could feel her struggling. Part of her, a very small part, probably felt guilty. But the larger part, the part that had been trained by Derek to see me as a resource, was just doing damage control. What about the mortgage? She finally asked. Not my problem. You took it out. You pay for it, or don't. I really don't care anymore. But your name is on it. If we default, it'll destroy your credit. Then I guess you better not default. I looked at her, this stranger who used to be my daughter. Or do. Either way, I'm done being your safety net. She left. Didn't say goodbye, didn't apologize, didn't try to stop me. Just left. And I felt nothing. That was the strangest part. I thought I'd feel something. Grief, rage, relief. But there was just numbness, just the quiet certainty that I was doing what I should have done months ago. Derek came home an hour later. I heard him and Sarah arguing in their bedroom, heard my name mentioned multiple times. He stormed into my room without knocking, and the expression on his face was pure fury. "You can't do this," he said. "Watch me. We have a contract, a verbal agreement. You can't just leave. There is no contract. There's fraud. There's theft. There's you taking advantage of a woman who loved her daughter enough to be blind. But there's no contract." He stepped closer, and for a second, I thought he might actually try to physically stop me. But I stood my ground, met his eyes, and he must have seen something there that made him reconsider. For the first time in months, I didn't look away, didn't shrink, didn't apologize for existing. I stood there, all 5'4" of me, and stared down this man who'd been terrorizing me with his coldness, his manipulation, his calculated cruelty. And something shifted in the room. The power dynamic that had always favored him suddenly didn't. Because I had nothing left to lose, and he knew it. "You'll regret this," he said. "I regret a lot of things. Trusting you isn't going to be one of them." He left then, and I finished packing. 3 days later, I moved out. Pastor Linda helped me, along with a few people from church. We carried my boxes to my new apartment, a small, sunny one-bedroom with windows that faced east. I'd be able to watch the sunrise again. Margaret from the church bookstore was there. Robert, a retired teacher who attended Tuesday Bible study. Ellen, who'd lost her own mother to a similar situation and understood what I was going through without me having to explain. They didn't ask invasive questions, didn't judge, just helped me carry boxes and rearrange furniture and made sure I had food in the refrigerator for my first week. "This is a good thing you're doing," Margaret had said, squeezing my hand. "It takes courage to choose yourself." I'd cried then. Not sad tears, but relief. The kind of crying that happens when you've been holding your breath for so long you'd forgotten what oxygen felt like. Sarah and Derek weren't home when I left. Didn't say goodbye. I left the key on the kitchen counter with a note that just said, "Good luck." And then I walked away from the house that had never been my home, the daughter who had never really been my child, the life I'd sacrificed everything to build. I walked away, and I didn't look back. They got away with it, you know. The fraud, the theft, the abuse. I never pressed charges. Never even reported it to the mortgage company. I just walked away and let them deal with the consequences of their choices. Do you think that was fair? Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you have fought harder, demanded justice, or would you have done what I did and just cut your losses? Because here's the thing about justice. Sometimes it's internal. Sometimes the victory isn't in punishing them, but in freeing yourself. I spent the first month in my new apartment waiting for them to contact me, waiting for Sarah to call, to apologize, to realize what she'd lost. But the phone never rang. And gradually, I stopped waiting. My credit did get destroyed when they defaulted on the mortgage 6 months later. Exactly like I knew they would. My credit score dropped 200 points overnight. I can't get approved for a loan, can't even rent certain apartments. The financial damage they did will follow me for years. But you know what? I don't care, because I'm free. I wake up every morning and make my coffee without worrying about the smell bothering anyone. I sit by my east-facing window and watch the sunrise paint the Phoenix sky in shades of pink and orange. I have conversations without calculating how much space I'm allowed to take up. I'm visible again, to myself, if no one else. Pastor Linda still checks on me, brings me casseroles, invites me to church events, makes sure I'm not isolated. The community I thought I'd lost when I gave up my old house. It was still there, waiting for me to come back. Turns out I was never alone. I just let them convince me I was. I got a part-time job at the church bookstore. Doesn't pay much, but it gets me out of the house, and I like being around people who see me as a person, not an ATM. The owner is this sweet woman named Margaret who's about my age, and we have coffee together sometimes and talk about everything and nothing. Working at the bookstore has given me something I didn't know I'd lost: purpose. I help people find the right book for their Bible study. I organize the shelves, making sure everything is in its place. I chat with regulars who come in just to browse and talk. There's this one man, George, who comes in every Thursday. He's a widower, lost his wife 2 years ago. We talk about grief sometimes, about loss, about what it means to rebuild your life after it's been shattered. We understand each other in a way that doesn't require explanation. "You seem different," he said to me last week. "Lighter, somehow." I'd thought about that. I think I'm just taking up space again, remembering that I'm allowed to exist without apologizing for it. He'd nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. I'm rebuilding. Slowly. One day at a time. Sarah sent me an email about a year after I left. Subject line: "We need to talk." I deleted it without reading it. Whatever she had to say, I didn't need to hear it. That chapter of my life was closed. 3 months later, another email, then a letter, then a voicemail. The voicemail said, "Mom, I know you're angry, but we really need to talk. There are some financial issues and just call me back, please." Financial issues. Of course. The mortgage I'd warned her about. The consequences I'd predicted. And now she wanted to talk, not because she missed me, not because she regretted how she'd treated me, but because she needed something. I deleted that too. Sometimes I wonder if she tells people what happened, if she's cast herself as the victim in this story, the daughter abandoned by her ungrateful mother. Maybe she has. Maybe she genuinely believes it. Abuse victims often don't recognize what they're doing because they've normalized it. But that's not my problem to solve. I did my part. I raised her. I loved her. I sacrificed for her. And when she decided that wasn't enough, when she decided to use me instead of love me, I made the hardest choice of my life. I chose myself. Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this, something I wish I'd known before I signed away my home, my security, my peace of mind. When the system fails you, and it will fail you sometimes, you need to know where to turn. I was lucky. I had Pastor Linda. I had my church community. I had a lawyer who worked pro bono. But not everyone has those resources, and the official channels we're supposed to rely on often can't help. You know what I learned? That financial abuse of seniors is epidemic, but it's rarely prosecuted. The police don't want to get involved in family matters. The courts are backlogged and expensive. Adult protective services is underfunded and overwhelmed. The very systems designed to protect people like me often can't or won't. So what do? You build your own safety net. First, find your community. Churches, senior centers, community groups. These are your lifelines. The people there have seen what you're going through. They can offer practical help, emotional support, and sometimes just a friendly ear when you need to talk. Second, document everything, every conversation, every transaction, every promise made and broken. Keep copies of all financial documents somewhere safe, somewhere the abuser can't access. I can't tell you how many times those copies I made saved me from gaslighting myself into believing I'd misunderstood. Third, know your rights. There are laws protecting seniors from financial exploitation, but you have to know they exist to use them. Find a legal aid society in your area. Many offer free consultations. Get educated on what abuse looks like because it's not always obvious. Fourth, and this is crucial, tell someone, anyone. The worst thing you can do is stay silent. Abusers thrive on isolation, on convincing you that what's happening is normal or that you deserve it or that no one would believe you anyway. Break that isolation. Talk to a friend, a religious leader, a counselor. Just talk. Fifth, protect your finances preemptively. Never give anyone unrestricted access to your accounts. Never sign papers without reading them, no matter who's asking. Don't let anyone rush you or guilt you into financial decisions. And if you're pressured, that's your red flag right there. Finally, understand that healing takes time, and it doesn't happen in a straight line. Some days I still doubt myself. Still wonder if I was too harsh, if I should have given them another chance. But then I remember the woman I was in that small bedroom, erasing herself to avoid conflict, and I know I made the right choice. The support networks that saved me, the church, the legal aid, the community groups, they exist in every city. You just have to find them. And yes, it takes courage to reach out, to admit you need help. But that courage is what separates surviving from thriving. If you're in a situation like mine, please understand, it's not your fault. You're not stupid for trusting family. You're not weak for wanting to believe the best in people you love. You're human, and you deserve better than to be used, manipulated, and discarded. There are people who will help you. Organizations dedicated to protecting seniors from exploitation. Hotlines you can call anonymously. Resources you might not even know exist. They're out there. You're not alone. And to anyone watching who knows someone in this situation, speak up. Don't assume it's not your business. Don't wait for them to ask for help because shame and manipulation might prevent them from ever asking. Offer specific support. Don't just say, "Call me if you need anything." Say, "I'm coming over Tuesday with lunch, be ready." Be the ally I was lucky enough to have. Be the person who sees what's happening and refuses to look away. Because the system may fail us, but we don't have to fail each other. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I know this was a lot. 68 years of life distilled into one long, painful story. But if my experience helps even one person recognize the warning signs, protect themselves, get out before it's too late, then it was worth sharing. I want to know, where are you listening from? What time is it in your part of the world? Are you in Phoenix like me, or somewhere completely different? Drop a comment and let me know. I love seeing where this story reaches. And if this resonated with you, if you saw pieces of your own life in mine, hit that like button. Not for me, but as a reminder to yourself that you're not alone, that other people understand, that there's a whole community of survivors out there who've walked this path and come out the other side. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you have pressed charges, cut contact sooner, stayed and tried to fix it? I genuinely want to know, because every person's situation is different and there's no one right answer. If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. There are more stories like mine here, stories of people who faced impossible situations and found a way through. Maybe your story will be next. Maybe sharing it will help someone else the way hearing others helped me. And before you go, I want to leave you with 2 more videos you might find helpful. The first is about recognizing financial manipulation in families with specific warning signs to watch for. The second is about rebuilding your life after betrayal, with practical steps for starting over. Both are in the description below. Until the next story, take care of your heart. Protect your peace. And remember, you are never too old, never too far gone, never too broken to choose yourself. Sometimes choosing yourself is the bravest thing you can do. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, the sunrise looks different from my new window, but it's no less beautiful for having found it again.